Hello, I'm here with Adrianna Tam. Adrianna is a Taiwanese-American conductor and singer with an international career. She currently serves at Luther College as an assistant professor of music, where she conducts the Collegiate Chorale and Aurora. And she is one of our guest artists for our AAPI commemoration activities. Adrianna, welcome. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I just want to start us off with the same question I've been asking everybody. Tell us about yourself.
Goodness. I could say anything.
Should I say more?
I can say anything about myself?
Well, preferably something related to the stuff that we've been doing.
I understand. Tell us. Can you ask me again?
Okay, I'll ask you more. Can you tell us a bit about your experience growing up and where you come from, your background, and how your Taiwanese American parts of your identity played a role in your growing up? And
Yeah, so I grew up in a suburb of Texas, and of Dallas, Texas. And in this particular area where my parents eventually settled, there are actually a number of Asian Americans, especially those of Chinese or Vietnamese descent. So when I was in elementary school, I don't think it was very clear to me that I was necessarily different. I played with friends who looked like me. But then in middle school, we moved to another suburb that had a different kind of demographic. And I think in addition to going through hormones and middle school and moving and all of those awkward things, that was maybe the first time in my life where I realized, not everybody goes to Chinese school once a week to learn the language. And that some people might take that part of my identity and make assumptions about it. Like in class, Adrianna's, doing well in math because she's Asian. Or, it became something that maybe could be potentially embarrassing if someone targeted that. But at the same time, interestingly enough, and this is the age of AOL Instant Messenger, and the internet is starting to become more widespread. You don't have to wait for your modem to dial up necessarily. But there was some kind of movement, I can't even call it a movement, but of Asian pride. Did you experience this? I'm a bit older than you. But it was Asian pride, AZN.
Okay.
And I think I gravitated toward that and kind of thought, this is a way for me to be a part of something that's not just me. And it was not just in my suburb where I was living. I stayed connected to my friends who went to that Chinese school closer to where I had grown up, or even a larger community. And I had an AOL Instant Messenger username that was sort of Asian pride. And that was a short-lived moment, and I'd love to see what scholars maybe have written about it in the academic literature.
That was still in middle school?
Yeah, that was middle school, maybe into high school.
Okay. And
then I went to college, and at MIT, it's about 25% Asian, so I didn't really necessarily feel like a minority there either. But I think as far as identity goes, it's been a lot more of a thoughtful question, I think, in the last 5-10 years, because I have lived abroad and because of really rapidly changing social currents. Going abroad, I lived in Germany and Austria for 3 years studying, and that first year in Germany, I was part of a program that encouraged you to not go home because you were going to be completely immersed in the language and in the culture. And I think that's a really good challenge, especially for the purposes of the program. And I was an adult. I was 24. And yet I felt reduced to being like a child who can I almost see like my 3-year-old niece feeling so frustrated, like, why don't you get what I'm trying to say? Because I have these fully formed ideas and thoughts that are nuanced, I think, but I can't always say it. And once again, maybe similar to what I experienced in middle school, people might take what they see in me and make certain assumptions. So, for example, one of the most obvious things that happened to me while I was in Germany and was just not, it really bothered me at first, was that people would ask me, where are you from? And I'd say, I'm from the United States, I'm from Texas. And then there was almost inevitably a look of surprise, like, oh, but you don't look like what I think Americans look like. Or there might even be a follow-up question, like, oh, but you mean aren't you from China? Like, right. No, I just told you I'm from Texas. And on the one hand, that gave me an appreciation for the relative diversity that we have in the United States. And then eventually I took that to mean, well, you know what? Maybe I am the first Asian American they've ever met. And I'm going to try to just accept it gracefully and move forward. So being abroad, I think, really heightened my awareness of who I am and my identity inside, but also that can be reflected in my phenotypic appearance.
Sure.
Then with the more recent social currents, I think I have had to think about what it means to be Asian American, what is a model minority, how did that come to be, and not only what is my identity, but how does that fit into the identities of many other people? How have I been placed in a world that tries to maybe pit one group against the other? That was quite a long answer.
You said a very interesting vocab term, model minority. Can you talk about, well, maybe you can just elaborate what that means, but then also, did you view yourself as a model minority in hindsight? Maybe you didn't have the vocabulary, but...
Yeah, so a model minority, that myth is this idea that, generally speaking, like the East Asian immigrants in the United States are people who exemplify what the United States wants in an immigrant. Somebody who arrives legally, somebody who follows the law and contributes to society because they are strong academically or professionally. So I believe the term was first used to describe Japanese Americans in particular, and painted them as people who were very law-abiding, unobtrusive, stayed in their box, maybe even submissive, but can also be extended to like the Asians are good at math thing. But then you also think about who did we in the United States allow to immigrate from Asian countries? And a lot of times those were people who had a lot of training, maybe as medical professionals, as engineers. So that also meant that the perception of Asians was curated in that time period. For me, I probably unknowingly played into that in middle school. Again, the awkwardness, the hormones. I had just moved to a new school. I didn't know anybody, and I didn't have friends. So one of the things that I did pour myself into was my academics. I did love learning, but those factors of my life and my shyness and of my being in a new environment and doing decently in school, all of those factors coincided just by coincidence that maybe I could fulfill that myth for some people who saw me.
Right. It's a central theme that continues to come up in these in this programming, this AAPI exploration, is this question of the narratives that are built for us, right? That we buy into, or that we have to that we have to form identities in the rejection thereof, right? And one of them is the model minority idea that what is it to be Asian American? Well, it is to be diligent and studious and get advanced degrees and contribute to society and not rock the boat. And that there's a and that we as children, right, are aware of that kind of dynamic, whether we can articulate it or not. And that we often buy into it. Some people maybe reject it, but either way, it's there, right?
Looking back, I have to wonder, how is it that these 11 to 13-year-olds had already had in their heads, right, like, this is how we're going to perceive Adrianna and describe her? I doubt they went home to the dinner table and said, hey, Mom, Dad, there's this girl in my school, her name's Adrianna, and she looks like this. There's no way that they talked about me.
And the mom and dad go, oh, well, if she's Asian American, then this is what she's like.
Yeah, but it was already kind of pre-programmed in there somehow.
And I wonder too, kids these days, or maybe even the following generation, to what extent that stays or has changed. I mean, there's so many more, not that we've reached parity at all, but there are much more nuanced Asian narratives in media these days. Yeah. Asian superheroes. Listeners and viewers might be surprised by some of the music that you've brought for us in this exploration. The choir is singing Give Me Jesus, which is an African-American spiritual. Can you talk a bit about how you came to that song as a part of your exploration, your reflections?
Yeah, so my mom, she is a musician, and although she grew up in Taiwan, really her musical training was a Western training. And she sang in a children's choir, that she sang solfege, and sometimes she tells the story of how when she was a child, she said, I want to be one of those singers in the Vienna Boys Choir. I want to be a Vienna, And that was her training growing up. And then she came to the States and got a conservatory training. So for her, or I guess as a result, for me growing up as her daughter, she did not want me playing rock music, pop music out loud on the speakers, because for her that's noise, and she'd just rather have what for her is comforting music. But one of the things that did belong in that sphere for her was jazz and spirituals. And my mom, who is also a singer, I remember her performing Give Me Jesus, Deep River, to name a couple spirituals. And I feel like even though my mother and I are not African American, and we can never have that same relationship to the text and history, we just simply cannot. We still, nonetheless, has become a part of our musical fabric and vocabulary. And I think it'll be a music I always love. So, in fact, this particular spiritual is one that we sang at my grandmother's funeral service. And there's a line in it that says, I heard my mother say, give me Jesus. And my grandmother was Christian. And then another line is, oh, when I come to die, give me Jesus. So now, also for the rest of my life, I will connect this song to my grandmother. This line of grandma who was alive during the Japanese occupation and fled with the nationalists to the island of Taiwan. My grandparents are from Fujian province of mainland China, who was a principal at a middle school in Taichung, and then my mother, who then immigrated to the United States and is in academia herself. To me, this is it is not, for us, it is not a narrative of we are descendants of people who were enslaved, but it is a narrative that connects us of maybe motherhood, and that there's a cycle of life and death.
It's one of my favorite things about doing this, and working with people like yourself, is just the novelty of opening up the program and seeing music that's unexpected but completely, profoundly, deeply felt. And it's one of the reasons why, or it's one of the guiding impetuses for this whole programming is let's not start by saying we want to hear music by Asian people. Let's start by saying we want to hear thoughts from Asian Americans. And I think it's so wonderful that not only Give Me Jesus, but other pieces on the program, other pieces we've done in previous year, are unexpected, but that is part of, I think, the central tension or the central narrative of being Asian American, right?
Yeah, I'm thinking about the word you used, unexpected, and I think it can be unexpected that maybe I picked a spiritual, but at the same time that makes me think of one of the conversations I've had recently with my older sister. I was trying to pick something to wear for a performance, and I said, do you think I should wear something more traditional to bring a little bit more kind of representation to the podium? And she said, you know that just by being you are the representation. Right. And I think in that same way, like, what is my Asian American experience? Well, I am Asian American, right. So everything I live is my experience. And it doesn't have to be that I went to Chinese school growing up or that I learned Chinese traditional dance growing up. Yeah, that is part of my experience. But it's also that, gosh, what are some other things I've done in my life that are unexpected?
You grew up in Texas.
I grew up in Texas. I know how to ride a horse. And I speak German better than I speak Chinese. So, yeah.
Yeah. I want to talk a bit about the set of music that you're bringing to our concert tonight, or whenever it comes out.
Yeah.
Memories and dreams are kind of the themes that have come together. Can you talk about how those themes came together, and maybe a little bit about how the pieces reflect those themes?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of related to what we were just talking about. So one of the things I try to do is to be a conductor. And when you're a conductor, you are kind of doing this time travel thing where you're living in the past, present, and future. So you're living in the present, right? You're in the moment of the music making, but you're also cataloging the past, particularly in a rehearsal, like, oh, I need to remember that thing that happened that we should revisit. But you're also anticipating in the future what is coming up in the music that I need to prepare the choir for, or the orchestra, whomever. And, or even, already thinking ahead to what are we going to rehearse next, or what should we perform next after this. So I think that as a person reflecting on identity, on my Asian Americanness, it is related in the sense that when we're making music, we're telling a story. And when you are thinking about human experiences and identities, you're also looking at stories. You're looking at that history, and how is the story being told now, and how do you hope it will be told in years to come? Sort of, I guess that would be like historical fiction and sci-fi. I don't really know, but so for me, I guess some of those memories are kind of more childhood related. For example, the folk song that I'll be singing is one that I've known, I don't even know how long, and that I danced to as a child. But I think the dream part comes with the bookend pieces that I've chosen. So the first one is Golden Gates by Amy Beach, and then the last piece is Beautiful City by Stephen Schwartz from the musical Godspell. So Amy Beach, she would have been composing in the late 19th century and was not Asian American, and I don't think she or the person who wrote the poem were thinking about Asian Americans, but there are parts of that text. Well, first of all, the poem is very idyllic. It's at the end of the day watching the sun set, so you can imagine all the colors and Mother Nature, and we're maybe nostalgically reflecting on people who have lived as they go across the river, this metaphorical river, to the afterlife, being born by angels. And for me, though, the title Golden Gates, so those could be the pearly gates to heaven, right. But Golden Gate Bridge makes me think of the West Coast with the long history of especially Chinese Americans, and Angel Island, okay, the angels who bore our loved ones away. Well, Angel Island is the port of entry that I think we often think about in Asian American history, of a lot of, let's say, Chinese Americans who came to California for the gold rush, who came to help build the western half of the Transcontinental Railroad. And that, for me, rather than thinking of, the sun is setting and I'm thinking about all my loved ones who have passed on to a better place, I'm almost kind of thinking of that sun has set in the past on those Chinese Americans and other Asian Americans or immigrants who came 2 centuries ago. Are they in a better place? What did they do so that we can be in a better place? And even though I'm not related to them, I'm a second generation. My parents immigrated. I don't believe I have any ancestors who came to the United States in the 1800s, but I nonetheless we are part of that inheritance.
It's like honoring the dreams of those who came before us.
Absolutely, yeah. So then the final piece, Beautiful City, starts with the line, out of the ruins and rubble, out of the smoke, where we see a ray of hope, more or less. And this was written, I think this song was added to the movie around the time of the riots in LA in the early 90s, surrounding the beating of Rodney King, an African-American man, by white police officers who were ultimately acquitted. And the injustice of that led to widespread rioting and further violence in Los Angeles. And there are very clear parallels, unfortunately, still to our world today. And there's not just Rodney King, there's not just George Floyd. There are many other names of people who have suffered as a result of a lack of beauty, I think, in human hearts or in human institutions. And the hope, the dream, is to build a place here on this earth, perhaps one day when we are done living this life that we've been given, there will be a better place for us. And I'd like to believe that. But in the meantime, we have a lot of work to do here to alleviate and heal for not just Asian Americans, of course, but for the many, many identities that make us who we are.
I'm struck by, just in listening to you speak, the last line of Beautiful City is not a city of angels, but a city of man.
Mm-hmm.
And that you're starting with Golden Gates,
Mm-hmm.
talking about the angels, bearing maybe the dreams of our those who came before
Mm-hmm.
to the sunset,
Mm-hmm.
and ending by saying, but it's up to us.
Mm-hmm.
The angels are not going to save us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at least while we're here on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask, what are you most excited about in the next couple of days?
I am so excited to do this concert. As a teacher and conductor at the moment, I don't get to sing very often. In particular, I did do a recital with my mom actually on campus, which was so fun to do a mother-daughter thing. But I don't often get to sing as part of a vocal ensemble, and to sing with two members of Cantus, Alex and Jeremy, and to sing with you,
Yeah.
and with Walter. I know, you're
You're so lucky.
Yeah, that is a real treat and an honor to be a part of that. What else am I excited about? I'm really hoping that while I'm in the cities, I get to have bubble tea. Or something else like that. Some things that, as lovely as Decorah is, things that we don't have there.
Uh-huh.
And just to be a part of something like this is also really special. Because I do think it's important to make that space. And I was thinking before sitting down to record this conversation with you, it's not necessarily about that, the life of Adrianna Tam was so important, we better record this. But that we are having these conversations, I think will be important, because people in years to come, in generations to come, might want to know, where were we then, and where are we now? How does that compare? Have we actually made any progress?
Yeah, a snapshot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Adrianna, thank you so much for being with us. I'm really excited that you're here and really excited to be collaborating with you. I think it's going to all be really great.
Thanks so much, Paolo. Thank you.